Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone. How's it going? Let's see. I got some more people filing in. We'll just get started in just a minute here. We're just going to wait for a few other people to join. How's everyone doing today? Everyone excited for week two? Week two of OpenTofu workshop. Good morning, guys. Let's see. All right. Good evening from Germany. Glad you can make it. You guys excited? Feeling good? Feeling ready for week two? Feeling ready? I got my OpenTofu shirt on. Ready to dive into modules. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, guys. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't seen me before, my name is Michael. I'm a cloud solutions architect for MassDriver, and I'll be taking you through week two of modules with OpenTofu. I'll go ahead and share a GitHub repo for week two of the OpenTofu Foundation's GitHub repo there. So if you want to follow along, you're welcome to. Week two has all the code up for essentially what we're going to be moving to. If you want to follow along live, that's good too. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. Week one is going to pick up from, or sorry, week two is going to pick up from week one, where Corey took us through building an AWS instance and a AWS DB instance to host WordPress. So in my terminal here that I should be sharing, if we ls, we just have the same Terraform that we ended up with from week one. If we take a look at the main.tf, this is the exact same, Terraform, essentially creating an AWS instance and an AWS DB instance and some security groups for our infrastructure. Our variables are going to be the same, and our outputs are going to be the same. So the point of week two is to convert our resources into modules. Now, why would we want to do that? Modules are actually really, really great because they allow you to group these resources logically in a reusable, maintainable way. You essentially abstract away what these resources are doing instead of having to, write out and deploy and manage these resources, maybe several different EC2 instances across different environments. Instead of replicating that code over and over and over again, you essentially control and manage this code in a module, and then you call that module in multiple places, and then you may have one or two different parameters that you're changing for different environments, different situations, but it really modules allow for collaboration, maintainability, and they're just a really good thing to have. So we're going to get started in building our modules for this OpenTofu. So let's go ahead and create a modules directory, and then we're also going to create a couple directories within there. So we're going to make a new directory, module/AWS instance. And then we're going to make one for our AWS DB instance as well. So if we go into modules, we have our two directories. We're going to start with our AWS instance directory. Now we want to essentially make the OpenTofu that we are going to be using to manage our EC2 instance in this directory. We can essentially just copy over what we have. I'm going to open up a new side pane here. And then let's see, we're going to go into our main.tf. I'm just going to have this open on the side so I can pull stuff over. And then we're going to open up main.tf here in our AWS instance modules directory. So what I want to do is I'm just going to copy over this Terraform or this OpenTofu, and then we're going to copy over this one. Okay, if I reopen it, nice fancy syntax highlighting. Okay, so we have our AWS instance here. We have the resource copied over. Everything's looking good for EC2. We'll variabilize it. We'll spruce it up here in a little bit, but let's finish copying over the rest of our files. The next thing that we want is to copy over our variables file. So we're going to go into variables. As we can see, we have essentially only one variable that I want to copy over, which is the name prefix. The image I'm going to leave out, and we're going to add that as a variable for our module. So we'll just go ahead and make some variables real quick. So we'll call this variable name prefix, and then type is equal to string, and description. I'm just going to copy over this description over here. Okay, let's open up variables again. Okay, so we need some new variables for our module for OpenTofu EC2 instance. Now, the reason why we want to use variables is so that we can plug in different values as we see fit. We're not having to hard code everything. That's not to say that when you are building out your module, you should variabilize everything. There's actually some really good reasons why you want to hard code some values. Maybe you have some non-negotiable values. Maybe you have some security constraints, budgetary constraints. There's reasons why you'd want to hard code some things. So it's really up to your discretion about how you want to approach that. It's a case-by-case basis. For my use case here for week 2, I want to set 5 additional variables. So I'm just going to type these out real quick, and then I'll talk about them as I go along. So we're going to call a new variable description. This is going to be, oops. There we go. And then type equals string, description equals set infrastructure description. And then we're going to set a default here. OpenTofu week 2 infrastructure description. So we can set some defaults here within our variables, which is going to be really nice, where if we essentially are calling a module across and we don't want to set any value for a particular variable, it's just going to default it to whatever it is. But of course, if we reference that variable and we essentially add a new value, it's going to replace that default for us, which is really nice. So we're going to make a new AMI variable, type is equal to string, description is equal to EC2 AMI. And then I'm going to set a default here as well. And I'm actually going to copy this value over from week 1. So this is going to be the same week 1 AMI, which deploys in, I'll just comment here, Amazon Linux 2. So this is the AMI that it's deploying here for us. And we're going to create instance type. And then the type is going to be a string. And then description is going to be SKU for EC2. And then default, we'll set default here of t2.micro. This is fitting in within that free tier for AWS, the T2 micro for, I believe it's 750 hours. So feel free to use that up into the limit, and you won't get billed for it. You get to use it for free. It's just pretty sweet. Now we're going to make user data, and then type equals string, description equals launch script for EC2, and then the default is equal to empty string. And then we're just going to make one more right here, and this is going to be our tags variable. Tags type is equal to maps of string, and then description equal set your infrastructure tags, and then default is going to be an empty map. Okay, So this is looking good. This is our variables file for EC2. Is that AMI specific to a certain region? That's a good question. It might be. Best way to know is to look through the AWS console based on the region that you're selected within the console and check. Yeah, Corey's going to check right now for us. Thanks, Corey. But I believe that AMI, the Linux 2, and then the Linux 2023 should be available to everybody. Okay, so we made our variables file. The last thing that we have to make here is our outputs file. So we'll do outputs.tf. And again, we're just going to kind of copy over what we have from week 1. So let's get the instance URL. I'm going to paste this in there. That looks good. So, yep, that's all we need. Let's see. AMI isn't available in the EU. Switch to US East 2. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, AMI ID specific to the region. Yeah, so essentially what I would suggest in that case then is to just check into the AWS console, see what AMIs are available for your region, specifically for the distribution that you're looking for, like Linux 2, and then apply that as the default. Okay, so now we have our OpenTofu for our AWS instance. Now let's go ahead and set up our OpenTofu for our DB instance. So same thing, we're going to create a main.tf, and then we'll just open the main.tf again here. We'll look for our AWS DB instance. We'll paste this over, and then paste this over as well. And then we also want this data block here. Now, if we open this again, so what we're doing here is we're copying over all of the AWS DB instance resources, including the data lookup for the default VPC into this new Terraform file. Are you going to show how to use a data source and filters at some point? We are, just not in this week. I believe that's coming in a future week. I'm not exactly sure which one yet, but that's a good question, Matthew. Thanks for asking. That link is in my data section for choosing AMI based in region. Cool, thanks, Nico. Okay, so we have our main.tf copied over. Let's go ahead and copy over our variables.tf. I'll close this. And the only variable that we have here for our MariaDB is enabling MariaDB public access. I'm actually not going to copy that one over for this week. You're welcome to if you want to. It's just not the variable that I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to go ahead and create my own variables here. So first we need name prefix, and then type is equal to string, description equal, actually, I'm going to copy this description here. Okay, now if I open up variables again, look at syntax highlighting. Okay, cool. So we have our name prefix copied over from our variables file. Now let's go ahead and create the rest of our variables. I'm going to create another 5 here, and we'll set some defaults, and then we'll continue on. So I want to create the instance class variable, type is equal to string, description is equal to db instance class, and call this a SKU. And then the default, I'm going to set to db.t3.micro, which is the one available for my region. Variable allocated storage type is equal to a number, actually. Description is equal to allocated storage for DB. And then default, I'm going to set the default here to 20. Could you maybe enable the folder structure view? Yeah, I can open up the folder structure view. It's not going to show much right now. but I can open it up as I go, and then you guys can see the directory there. Yeah. Thanks, Andreas. That's a good suggestion. Okay, so we made allocated storage. Now we need engine default type equals string, description is equal to DB engine, and then default we're going to set to MariaDB. And then two more. So we have engine version. Type is also going to be a string. Description is equal to MariaDB version. And then default we'll set to 10.6. And the last variables are tags. Type is equal to map string. Description equal to infrastructure tags. Default is equal to empty map. Okay, I may have misspelled infrastructure or a couple other things in the description. That's okay. I'm basically just building out these variables for you guys so that we can go ahead and get started with building out some other cool things. So we have our variables. The next thing that I actually want to do is go through, here, let's close out of this. We'll close out of this. Close out of this. The next thing that we need to do is go into, actually I need outputs. That's the last thing I need to do. For MariaDB, I'll just hold off on outputs. Actually, what are we using? Yeah, RDS endpoint. There you go. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now what I'm going to go do is go back through the actual OpenTofu main.tf, and I'm going to replace the hard-coded values that I have with the variables that I've created. So I'm going to close this here, go into modules, AWS instance. Actually, we're in DB instance already. I'll do DB instance first, variables, AWS DB. Variable, there we go. Okay, so now we see the variables that I have to work with, and we'll open up a folder structure. So we have our 3 OpenTofu files here, and I'm just going to go through and replace these with the variables, var.allocated storage. Now, like I mentioned before, you don't have to, actually I am missing some variables there on the right-hand side, but we'll address that in a second. We don't have to variabilize everything, and I won't be, but for most of this, I will. So this is going to be var.db name. I did need to add that db name. Let's go ahead and add this now. So we need variable, was it db name, type equals string, description equal database name. No default there. Variable username, type equals string, description equals db username, password, type equals string, description equals db password. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish this, var.username, and this is going to be var.password. Okay, so what I've gone ahead and done is replace some of the hard-coded values with variables, but like I said, I haven't replaced everything. The security group, I'm actually not going to be touching right now. And same with the VPC security group IDs and the skip final snapshot. These are actually values that I want to stay hard-coded. If they're hard-coded, that means that when I'm calling the module later, I can't change these values. And this is actually a really good practice for security, because if you want to modularize an OpenTofu resource or OpenTofu conception, abstract away the difficulty of having to set every parameter possible, right? What you'd want to do is hard code the values that are, like I mentioned before, non-negotiables. You don't want these values to be changed in the future unless you go through some some review process. Maybe it's checked into GitHub and you need approval before you can change this value in the repo. So that would be the best approach there. Would it be good to set the password of var as sensitive? Yes, it would. Ideally, I'm not going to be doing that for week 2 because we're just focusing on the modules. Essentially, yeah, I can just nah, I'm gonna skip it for now. That's a good suggestion, AB. I appreciate it. It is a good idea to set your password as sensitive. But since I'm focusing more on the modules, I'm just going to leave that as is, but I'll go ahead and add that as a challenge for you guys. In fact, after this webinar, I'll go ahead and update the challenge list to set the password as sensitive so you guys can kind of dig into the documentation and figure out how to do that. What does var.instance type map to? So instance type maps to this variable up here. Actually, that's a good catch. I would have encountered that error. So thank you for pointing that out. That actually would have been a failed deployment. So thanks, Rob. This actually maps to instance class, which is going to be the DB instance class. Yeah, it should be instance class. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. Okay, so now we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the DB instance. Yes, instance. We're going to close it out of this. Mod AWS instance, and then variables. So we're essentially going to do the same thing here with main.tf. We're going to be replacing. Oops. We're going to be replacing these with the variables that we have. So we have AMI, var instance type. Now, a couple of these are, like I mentioned, they're going to be set to the hard-coded value. So I'm not going to change them. User data, I am going to change. So this is var user data. That's going to clean up nicely. That way, the deployer of the module can essentially set their own user data. And this is going to be var.tags. And I think I need to make that var.tags change for the DB instance. Let me just confirm I have everything here. That looks good. Okay, so delete this comment because I don't need that. Delete that comment. Okay, let me check the AWS DB instance tags real quick and make sure I didn't miss those. Let's add tags, var.tags. Okay, sweet. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do, I'll close this. I'll actually close this tab, this side panel here. So what we've gone through is creating our variables, going through each of the variables and updating our resources with the variables that we created so that they can be called upon in our module. Now that can be all in that could be good. That could be a good practice. Essentially, what we're missing here is what if, for example, a deployer of my module is putting in a bad value for AMI, right? Instead of putting AMI and then whatever value they want specific to an AMI, they just put in foo. That would cause a crash. That would be a bad experience. It turns out that there's some really cool things that we can do with the variables file to control what values can be put into these fields to prevent bad experiences. So we're going to do that with a couple of these fields here with a new kind of field here that you guys might not have seen before called a validation. So a validation essentially allows us to set a constraint on this variable saying, hey, this variable has some conditions, and these conditions have to be met or nothing's going to deploy. Essentially, this value is going to be rejected for the variable. So for the AMI variable, I'm going to set a condition, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a kind of like a fancy length regex. We're going to make a regex check that essentially returns true or false based on if the string that is entered in for the variable of AMI starts with AMI, or not. Actually, I need a here. I need a caret. So starts with AMI, and then the AMI dash, and then the preceding characters are alphanumeric. And then those preceding alphanumeric characters, there's 17 of them. So I'm building out this regex. This regex essentially says, does the AMI match what I have here? If it, and the AMI comes from var.ami. So if it does, it's going to return the AMI. And what I'm doing here is I'm adding a length on top of the regex. So it says that regex, does the var.ami meet this regex? If it does, the regex function is going to return the actual AMI. If the length of the AMI is more than 0, then it's true. If the length of AMI is 0, meaning the regex hasn't returned anything, then the condition will return to false. So it's true, the variable's good, it'll go through deployment. If it's false, it won't. And OpenTofu will tell me that the AMI value that I've entered in doesn't meet the condition. We also need to add an error message with conditions. So I'm just going to say not a valid AMI. So this is a validation that we can add to AMI, which is really nice. It prevents bad experiences, getting through deploying partial resources. We're also going to add a validation in with our instance type. Now, with instance types, we can do a couple of cool things. What I want to do with instance type is, instead of using a regex, I'm just going to do like sort of like a match, saying that these values are allowed, but other values are not. And I can do that with contains. So we'll do contains. And then I'm going to say the allowed values are t2.micro, t3.micro. And then var.instance type. So, yeah, that's right. Okay, so what I'm saying with this condition is, if the value for the variable of instance type is t2.micro or t3.micro, then contains returns true. If it doesn't, then it returns false, and the variable is rejected. And of course, we need to add an error message here, and that equals invalid instance type must be, let's do, was it t2.micro or t3.micro. Okay, yeah, so I'm escaping quotes there. Okay, so I've added some validation here. This is going to set up for a good experience for my module user, which I'm going to look forward to, because I'm going to have less messages on Slack saying, hey, this failed to deploy. Oh, I missed a digit on the AMI, or oh, I deployed an instance type that we either don't have credits for in our account or meets a certain region, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we're finished with our variables there. Now what I want to do, now that I'm done with building out my actual modules, is I want to go back to my actual code here that is going to be deploying the OpenTofu. So we're going to open up a directory here. So I can use validations. Oh, thanks, Andre. Appreciate that. So what I want to do here is kind of like rip out a lot of this, the resources, and instead do module calls. So I'm just going to go through and clean a bit of this up, and then explain what I'm doing as I get to it. So we can delete this. We don't need the data lookup for the default VPC because we're doing that in our DB instance module. We can replace resource with module. We can remove this AMI. We're going to replace with var. Actually, we're going to leave this. I'm going to leave that the same. Instance type T2 micro, we're going to leave that same. Since we're setting associate public IP address in our module. We don't need that here in our module call. Same with VPC security group IDs. That's going to go away. Tags, I'm going to set name. Instead of calling a variable, I'm going to call this me or Michael. Okay. So, and then let's go ahead and open up our modules, AWS instance, variables, just to make sure that we haven't missed anything. So we have AMI, we have, we need a name prefix. That's what we need. Name prefix equal to week, so week 2 instance. That looks good. Let me just check over. And then we, of course, we need our source. So that's what we need more than anything is our source. And we're going to point it to where our modules folder is and then AWS instance. Okay, let me just confirm. Delete this. Okay, that looks good. So what I've essentially done is I've replaced my AWS instance resource with the module. I'm saying the source of my module, this is where the source of the module is, and then each of the values that I want to add a value for, then I set below. And then anything that is not added, I can either rely on the default for the variable, or I can hard code in the module. Now I'm going to do the same thing for AWS instance. So we're going to call this module. We're going to add a source, modules, and then AWS instance, DB instance, identifier. Was it identifier? Identifier equals, what is it? Actually, I think this one's name prefix. We don't call it identifier. Name prefix is equal to week 2 DB. Instance class, we're setting, we're actually defaulting this. Just reading the chat here real quick. Don't think tags is going to work there. Yeah, we'll see what happens, Oleski, with the tags. It might not, but you know, that's the fun of a live webinar. We can come across errors and then we can troubleshoot them together. So instance class, because I'm defaulting it, let me go ahead and open up that variables file, variables. So instance class, because I'm defaulting it to db.t3.micro, I actually don't need to call that here. Same with allocated storage, same with engine version, same with engine. DB name I need, username I need, password, we'll call this special password. So, same with these values, I don't need to call them here. So that looks good. And then the security groups, because I'm provisioning the security groups in my modules, I don't need to call them here. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. This is looking pretty lean. Tags equals owner Michael. Okay, I'm liking this. This is looking really good. Okay, so we built out our main.tf. Main.tf is built properly. So now let's go ahead and go to providers. Our providers actually don't need to change, which is really nice. Don't have to worry about that. We'll go to variables. The variables, all I'm going to do, I'm going to rip out name prefix and rip this out. I'm just going to keep image because that's the only one that I really need. And then outputs, all I really need is, I'm going to rip. So I need, actually, we'll call this DB endpoint, and then we're calling the module .aws DB instance .endpoint. And then Oops, what am I doing? Output instance public. So I want to output the public IP of my AWS instance here. So description equal to public IP of EC2 instance, and then value is equal to module dot AWS instance dot public IP. Okay. So as you can see, we went from going to when we were setting up our outputs before, the value was calling the actual resource. We were calling AWS instance dot this dot whatever public IP or whatever it was before. Now that we're using modules, we actually don't need to reference this. We just actually reference the module. And the module name is this value in the middle here, AWS instance. This module name actually could be anything. Like if I go back, let me make sure this is saved. If I go back into main.tf, I can call this AWS DB instance. I can call this foo if I wanted to. It doesn't matter. The name of the module is just for reference for me. The thing that matters is the source. The source is what tells the module what to deploy. The name of the module is just like if I were doing, if I did resource AWS instance, or not Azure, AWS instance, foo. This name is the same as the module name, if that makes sense to you guys. So you can name your modules whatever you want. You don't have to name it AWS DB instance. I just did it for clarity, but I just wanted to make that an important note because what we need to actually go and do for our user script data is add module to the beginning of our DB instance calls because we're no longer accessing the root resource, we're accessing the module. And that also means that I can delete this because we don't need that. The name of the module that we're calling is AWS DB instance. Because we can call the module different names, does that mean we can call the module multiple times? Yes, you can. As long as you're referencing the correct source, you can call the module as many times as you want. You can deploy the exact same, EC, not the exact same, but you can deploy the exact module for like EC2 5 different times in this one file. And as long as you give the module 5 different names, you can either deploy them with the same configuration or with a different configuration. But thanks, Terry. Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Okay, so we have our modules built up. We have our variables file. Everything's looking good. I think the last thing that we need to do is just init and deploy. Just confirming here with my notes. Let's go ahead and give it a shot, see what happens. So we'll run tofu init. And this is going to initialize all these modules for us. Kind of slow internet on my end, so apologies. As you can see, this is actually a fresh init. I didn't come pre-init here into this webinar. This is a fresh init for everybody. HashiCorp AWS clogging up my internet here. My goodness. Okay, let's try cancel and redo it. Oh my goodness. Sorry, Michael, it's all the memes I'm posting while connected to VPN. Thanks, Corey. Appreciate that. Sabotage. I call sabotage. Okay, let me go and cancel this. I think it might have to do with my providers file. No, that's interesting. So I'm trying to init 5.68, instead of, I'm just going to equal here. So there we go. Let's try this. 568 was working for me last night, and it's trying to bump up to 569. Maybe that was the problem. Hmm, this is interesting. Okay, let me try to rule this out here real quick. Week 2 code. Yeah, so remove that Terraform. Should we also be using depends on in our module AWS instance to require module.aws db instance so that the module.aws db instance variables are populated properly, or will Tofu automatically create those dependencies? Yeah, that's a really good question. So like Corey actually kind of alluded to, it depends. Oh, it looks like, yeah, AWS is just taking forever. I'll let Corey provided a great response to that question. I'll go ahead and read it out loud. Generally, OpenTofu will build the DAG, I believe that's the dependency graph, by your references, but occasionally a depends on can be required if there isn't a direct reference. Yeah, so the way the resource providers are built is a lot of these dependencies are directed acyclic graph. Thank you, Corey. The way these dependencies are essentially set are by the resource providers. The resource providers have some idea of what they're doing for building out their resources and what dependencies they need. But you'll find in some cases where the dependency that you want to set isn't there because it's not like 100% of a dependency. So sometimes you do need to set that depends on, but in other cases you don't. But great question, and thank you, Corey, for the response. Okay, so after like 3 hours, we finally init our tofu. So let's see if plan takes another 3 hours here. Okay, so we have some errors and we can go through and fix these errors. So we don't have an attribute name, endpoint, username, password, DB name. Okay, so we can go through and troubleshoot these errors here real quick. So why don't we have anything called endpoint? Let's go ahead and go into our main.tf module.db instance. That's because we need to deploy our DB instance first, I believe. Okay, let's go ahead and try that again. Nope, that didn't like it. What's going on with that? So we have our DB name, we have our username and password. What isn't it liking about this? Instance public IP. Oh, I think I have the output set up wrong. Give me 1 second. Let me check my outputs here. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm just making sure I have my my output set up right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so my outputs are not set up right. Let me go through and fix that up. So AWS DB instance outputs. So we were just outputting RDS endpoint before. Forgot to populate this with the other outputs that we actually need. We don't actually need RDS output. So we'll go ahead and create the output for endpoints. I believe we're missing. So description is going to be equal to database endpoints. And we need a value. What am I doing? Value is equal to AWS DB instance dot this dot endpoint. Output username, description. database master username. The AWS instance, this dot username, output password, database. So I wish I had Copilot for this, Copilot enabled for this, make it a lot faster, pre-fill a lot of this stuff. But oh well, we're gonna find just fine. Output, we got 2 more. DB name, it said, description, database name, value, AWS dot, what was it, DB, yeah, DB name. Okay, one more output, and the last one, I think, a security group ID we need. Group ID, description, ID of database security group, value AWS security group dot ID. I think this is right. Let's see, modules, AWS DB, main. Yeah, yeah. Okay, this looks good. Okay, so we'll just do the same thing super quick with instance. Make sure this is right. Okay, so we have instance ARN. We'll actually replace this with ID. AWS instance dot this dot ID. And then we need the public IP, right? Description, IP of EC2 instance, value AWS instance of this dot public IP, and then security group ID. So we don't need this one. But security group ID. We can do ID of security group value into this security group this dot ID. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I think this is right. I'm pretty sure this is looking good. So we'll go ahead and save that. And we'll just initialize this again. So whenever you make changes to your module, and thank God that didn't take like 3 hours. Whenever you make changes to your modules, in order to get that change up to where you're calling those modules, you have to reinitialize. So that's why we do tofu init. And now we'll run tofu plan. What you have there on your screen is your inputs. Okay, so plan looks good. Plan went through, all the outputs are working right. So now if we run tofu apply, and then we'll just auto approve because we're risky. Okay, so now we have an error message here. The parameter master user password is not a valid password. Okay, so I added incorrect values there. Let's go ahead and just fix that password. Tofu apply. Now, because I made changes to where I'm calling the modules instead of where the modules live, I don't need to reinitialize. I can just make that change and reapply. This is looking good. Okay, so we got our AWS instance, everything's still deploying. Sweet. I'm gonna take a look at the chat. So if we have anything going on here. Usually this takes like 3 minutes-ish. And then after this is done, what we're going to be doing is essentially just launching our public IP, connecting to that WordPress server, making sure everything looks good there. And I think I can close this window here. Doo-doo. Mm-mm-mm. It is interesting that AWS checks the password special characters on their server instead of doing it as a Terraform validate. Yeah, that is interesting, right? Um, yeah, I think it. I think it had to do with a character that wasn't escaped. I'm pretty sure that's why it failed. If I scroll back up to the error message while this is deploying, only principal ASCII characters. Besides, yeah, it wasn't. At symbol wasn't allowed, and I had an at symbol in the password, so that was just a HTTP REST response. Yeah, that's true. HTTP does have different password requirements. But they have specific, there's 4 characters that they exclude out of ASCII, and that's, was it /, ampersand, double quote, and space. So I think like you can probably add those in if they're escaped, but then that has some potential issues with your DB maybe. Not really sure. Everyone have a good weekend. Anyone do anything fun this weekend while we're waiting for this to deploy? I know it's been super hot for me in San Diego this weekend. Oh, here we go. Finish deploying. Okay, awesome. So now if I copy this, and then we'll go ahead and share a new screen here. I'm just share my browser. Okay, so typed in the IP address, open up the browser. Waiting for everything to load up. Come on, buddy. Let's see. Can I ping it? Request timeout. Oh, fun. Okay. Well, let me go ahead and switch back to my terminal. Laughs in Texan. It's 100 degrees here today, Rob. I don't know how hot it is in Texas right now, but it's actually 100 degrees. It's insane, and it's going to be high 90s all week in October. That's wild. Um, it's weird. It's weird that this IP address isn't returning. Oh, you know you know what it might be. Actually, here it is. It just loaded. It just took a minute. Uh, okay, DB server was, or not DB. EC2 instance was still starting up. Yeah, that's really hot. 82 in Texas. I would kill for 82, Rob. It is literally 100 degrees today. And it's going to be high 90s all week. Hate it. Okay, so our WordPress server is up and running. We can go ahead and go through the setup. My fake blog, my username, my email. Oops. Password. We'll just hide it set super strong password 123 4. Okay, and then we can install WordPress. I don't even remember what my password was, but we successfully did it. I mean, that's the only thing that matters, right? Yeah, I think that pretty much cleans it up. I'll go ahead and switch back to my terminal so we can take a look. Feel free to check out the week 2 update that I added to the repo. Yeah, that's how you know it's a good password. You have to write it on a sticky. I have to tattoo it on my forehead. Feel free to check out week 2 of the repo. I'll go ahead and post a link to that in the chat again right now. But check out week 2, guys. Thanks for joining me. This is pretty much wrapping up for week 2. Tune in next week for week 3 of the workshop, where we're going to be covering functions and control structures with OpenTofu. I believe our CTO Dave is going to be doing that. So please come and check it out. Thank you everybody for joining us today. It was super fun. And yeah, check out the chat. If you missed week 1, check out the YouTube video there. It was a pleasure, and Andre, happy to see you again. Thanks, Nico. Thanks, guys. See you guys next week. Have a good week. Cheers.